Not only do we need them, but they're a requirement and they're something that we must have. And I'm confident by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we professionals can rise to the occasion and provide these solutions, inshallah, in conjunction and collaboration with our communities. So at this point, I'd like to open the question and answer component. We can all turn our attention to the chat. I saw one question that asked about the book that was referenced in one of the presentations, but I'd like to invite people to raise your hand and or unmute yourself and address questions to our panelists collectively, or you can address them to individuals that you may feel are most pertinent to the work that they presented here today. And I don't see any hands. I don't want to be selfish and give you all a question from myself, but perhaps I can give one to get us started and inviting the attendees to share. What would you say is the one thing that has been most impacted in this triple pandemic environment that you've had to change what you were doing, and how successfully have you made that transition with the groups that you're serving?
I'll go for it. So I would say that, the transition from in-person therapy to online therapy has been, one of the biggest transitions. And I'm sorry about that. I'm like right next to the hospital building. So, but yeah, that transition, I think, has been challenging, especially with this population, because I feel like the preteens and the teenagers you have a harder time engaging them. And so the fact that you're no longer in person and now you're doing it online, it's a little bit challenging because they're like sitting down here. I'm like, hey, can I see you? It's these like little disruptive behaviors that they can engage in because now we're online, and and they can do that. But it's been a workaround, and I would say overall it's been much better than I thought. And I think that if we continue to do the work, we've all continued to do the work throughout this time and tried to just make the best of it, and Allah makes it easier. So,
inshallah. Can we ask another panelist to comment on that? There's a question which is coming in from Tessin. Hope I'm pronouncing that properly. Tessin, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, and if you need a minute to get that ready, perhaps one of our panelists can go ahead.
Okay, so I worked in a school setting with adolescents. A lot of them are very depressed, have anxiety, and express suicide ideation. I've noticed the trend is that their main stressor comes from their relationship with their parents or lack of relationship with their parents. And because of their age, I'm not necessarily, I don't really talk to the parent, because if they don't want me to talk to the parents, I don't inform the parents. And it's kind of hard for me to work with them when I can't help them, Do you see my dilemma is I can't tell them and I want them to stay with me. So the question is for the last panelist, how do I go around that when they don't want me to contact the parents and bringing that family support?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's, the way that I do it, and because, I work a lot with, I'll start with the teen, but I always involve the families. And I know that because you're in a school, maybe it's not necessarily that way, because usually the parent is bringing the child to me. But what I would recommend is the way that I do it is I align myself with the child. I make them understand that I am doing, I'm your therapist, okay? I am working for helping you and supporting you. That's what I'm doing, and that's my focus. And to be able to do that, sometimes I can actually be a facilitator when it comes to you having conversations with your parents that might normally be really tough. So then I will kind of introduce this idea that, let's bring your mom or dad into the room, and why don't we have this conversation between the three of us together? And, and oftentimes they actually go for that, because that's, that little bit is what they need. That support, and the fact that I'm there and I'm supporting them, and I can, if they need to say something, I can also kind of start off the conversation. I can jump in, I can talk to their parents before and after, And so that's been an approach that has worked for me really well.
Thank you. Yeah, I try to tell them, and the stigma with these parents, the ones that I am successful with, it's a challenge that self, but I understand, but a lot of them just don't want me to contact. They're so scared of what will happen and if their situation will worsen. And so it just puts me in a really hard spot. But thank you. That's good advice.
Yeah. No, I
Doctor,
inshallah, I know it's really tough. You're in a tough position, but I hope inshallah it works.
Dr. Adam, did you have a comment? You seem like you're unmuting. See, could I help?
Yes. Assalamu alaikum. So I work with immigrants from Africa, and they are very stressed out with the pandemic. They talk to me about being a collectivist community, and they are used to see their family all the time. Now they are not. And also a lot of them are essential workers, and they have to teach their children, educate their children, and they do not have the abilities to do that. So they are very much stressed out. And then when I talk to them about addressing the mental illness, they were telling me that it's difficult for them to admit it's a weakness if they have mental illness. So that's one group that I work with. Another group is the immigrant and refugee who speak a different language. With the pandemic, it's hard to get a translator. Sometimes also they don't have data. They don't have Wi-Fi. They don't have a computer. Sometimes when the kids have school issued iPad or something like this, it helps. But it's really affecting my communication with my patient, diverse patients.
Jazakallah khair for sharing that transitions I guess everyone's making with telehealth. Wanted to invite some of the other panelists who haven't had a chance to chime in yet. What have been some of the impacts on cultural competence, Islamophobia, or the other dynamics that you've brought up, especially in this triple pandemic environment?
I can go ahead and chime in a bit on that. And there was actually a question I saw in the WOVA app related to my presentation saying, you know, a lot of youth are trying to assimilate now in the face of Islamophobia. They want to assimilate and just be able to fit in. And actually that came up in our focus group. One of the participants was saying, you know, I can kind of pass as just you know, a white person because she had lighter skin, and she was saying, you know, that's just easier for me to kind of just assimilate and move forward. But the issue there is that not everybody can do that. You know, not everybody, if you're trying to fit in, but you, you know, if your appearance is clearly Muslim, you wear the hijab, you are clearly from a different country or a different race, you know, obviously a lot of these students really struggle when they're trying to fit in and they find themselves still being rejected. And so that's why I think it's so important, you know, that can create more negativity. So that's why I really work with the youth to come from an understanding of what do you know about your culture, your background, or what do you like about you know, your own family's background, so that they really come from a strength-based place. And I agree with all the other panelists that family work is really so important. A lot of times when youth reject Islam or, you know, reject their cultural background, it's based on the way it was presented to them in their family environment, or difficult family relationships, family rules, parents that are just overly strict. And all of that is put back on Islam. Well, if I wasn't Muslim, I would be allowed to do X, Y, and Z. And so I found that meeting with parents and, you know, the youth, helping them to really understand what do you know about Islam? What do you know about this rule that your mom has for you? Why do you have this rule? Having this conversation with the families has really cleared up a lot of misunderstandings and helped, you know, the adolescents understand themselves more, but the parents also understand, you know, what you're trying to do with is actually having an opposite effect. You're pushing your kids farther away from their culture and their religion because, you know, you're presenting it in a very harsh way. And so I have found those conversations to be really helpful as well.
Jazakallah khair. Sounds like a lot of cultural competence literature. It talks about dynamically sizing identity to contextual demands so you don't lose the essence of who you are, but you're also inclusive of the realities that some of our parents may not have lived through, but our current generation is. So happy there's a Muslim youth panel as part of this conference.
Absolutely.
I'd like to invite our first two panelists, Drs. Sale and Morgul. Do you have anything that you'd like to add? We have about 3 minutes left. Anything you'd like to add about what we discussed so far, or any closing comments? And if not, Dr. Adam, did you have your hand up for an additional comment?
I just want to say we really have to work together with our patient, with us as a community, as profession, and reach out and communicate with other people, collaborate with other people, because we all have one goal, is the safety and the best interest of everybody. This is our Islam, want us to help everybody. And alhamdulillah that Allah gave us this opportunity to help. So we also have to use it in His sake, because we get rewards for doing this in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we are doing our job and we're helping our Muslim and non-Muslim because we all are human beings that Allah wants us to do good to others.
Jazakallah khair for that positive comment. I almost think that's a good note for us to close the workshop on. And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told us, inna ma'al usri yusra, inna ma'al usri yusra, that with these difficulties, Allah has said, ma'a, it is accompanied with the relief. So inshallah, we'll work toward that. Thank all of you for presenting and attending. This has been a very enlightening workshop session. I've learned a lot. I appreciate the presentations, and inshallah, I hope that the rest of our day continues to be successful and enlightening as we move forward, inshallah ta'ala, ameen. And with that, if there are no other comments, we'll say assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Alaikum assalam.